Andy Williams here from the Kids Media Club podcast, talking straight into your ears, which is a bit weird when I put it like that. But if you are interested in sponsoring the Kids Media Club podcast and talking directly into the ears of key decision makers for the industry, then get in touch. You can reach us on the Kids Media Club podcast.com or reach out to myself, Emily, or Joe on LinkedIn. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm first again. I feel like I've had a couple of weeks where I haven't been the first one, so I'm back in the safety zone of being the first one talking. How's everyone doing?
Good.
We're nearly
knuckling down for Christmas.
Can we say we're in the countdown to Christmas?
So, what are we going to talk about today?
Well,
it's been kind of a slow.
It's not as if there's
week,
much happening.
A bit of a slow news week. It's impossible to even get ahead of the curve with everything, with all the developments that are happening. And I know everybody out there in the industry world is sick of the takes, but you guys, we need to talk about it because it is the biggest story of the year, I would say. Am I overstating it to say it's been the biggest story of the past maybe 3 years in media? It's kind of a big deal. Netflix are buying Warner Brothers. Paramount are not happy about it. Obviously, that's been the most recent development. David Allison's gone full Farouk assault. Is that a term? But listen, we're here to chew over what it means for kids media, as we always are. And I do think it would be remiss of us not to be talking about this, despite the fact that I know you're both a little bit tired and jaded from the LinkedIn takes.
Well, I mean, I think we can justifiably say we're going to look at it through a kids' media lens rather than just the comparisons to Succession has been pointed out, and Hostile this, and Ellison throwing his toys out the pram, and secret meetings at Mar-a-Lago and then at the Kennedy Center. I mean, really, it's a conspiracy theorist's dream this week, isn't it?
I mean, why anybody would go for a secret meeting at Mar-a-Lago after like everything we've been through this year is like immediate red flag. Like it's just a hard no for me on ever doing that.
Yes. So kind of zoom in. So going into kind of the details then, or kind of bringing it down to the level that we'd be able to kind of have some experience of. I think there's definitely a sense of what it might mean for Netflix, what's in it for Netflix, and then what it might mean for producers and then the industry at large. What's your kind of thoughts on, so the first of those, what do you think the deal means for Netflix?
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in, Emily, just because I won't have anywhere near as much to say as you, and I feel you're probably better qualified. So I'll get my 2 penneth out of the way, and then you can jump in. Doesn't this give Netflix really the last missing piece of their puzzle, which is that huge franchise that, we've seen a little bit of with K-pop Demon Hunters. I mean, goodness, if we thought that was the biggest story of the year, we were wrong, weren't we? Now that this has come along. But that means potentially on the back of K-pop Demon Hunters, Netflix could get DC. I mean, surely that's what they're really missing, right? Okay, over to you.
Yeah, it's IP. That depth. Netflix have coveted it. I do kind of feel like HBO has been, the standard that I think is pretty much, it's been referenced by Ted Sarandos throughout, the rise of Netflix. And it's like, that's what he's wanted, right? Like that is the gold mine that he's wanted. Those are the box sets. I would hazard a guess to say those are the box sets that Ted Sarandos grew up working in Blockbuster watching, right? And that's where the seed of this of what is Netflix came through. So yeah, it's IP, but like I get that, and Netflix are great with IP. They're pretty good with IP, with doing TV IP. They understand how to build TV-based universes around their IP. They're not always amazing at it. They're like B+ A- at it. So that's what they get. But I do. My main concern is that it's all of the trappings that come with a legacy business like this that Netflix are not accustomed to having to operate within. So silo.
Absolutely, but do you think there's other parts of that kind of jigsaw puzzle? Do you think that it provides keys to unlock other things that have eluded them up to this point? So merchandise has been a big question.
Yeah.
Does this kind of amplify their ability to really lean into merchandise in a way that they haven't been able to do at this point? What does it mean that theme parks becomes part of their?
Well, yeah,
part of their toolkit?
that was my thoughts too, because what you said, Emily, is right. They've been really good with TV IP. But when we talk about the franchise kind of legacy IP that Disney and Warner Brothers have, I mean, that's built over decades, right? But also is built over merchandise and location-based entertainment and all of that, which Netflix hasn't been around long enough really to have gathered a head of steam in yet. But also we've seen that they've opened up Netflix houses, haven't they? So they've started dipping their toes into LBE. We've seen with K-pop Demon Hunters, they were almost forced to get into signing a couple of rather large master toy licenses pretty quick. So now they've started down that road. Does this absolutely superpower them into actually turning them into what we're calling legacy studios? But it kind of gives them all the trappings that are synonymous with a legacy studio, right?
Emily was unexpectedly called away from the podcast at this point, so she isn't in the rest of the show. And just thought I'd leave this message in case anyone was wondering what happened to Emily.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a few times, even before this massive story, that Netflix for a while has been kind of morphing into establishment, not necessarily into those legacy studios that I was just talking, but it has been moving on the spectrum towards establishment, which I guess was always going to happen. But it feels like if they're going to acquire this catalogue, potentially DC, then that makes them the very thing that they always railed against. It's almost, it makes them another Disney. They're going to have to start thinking about their merch lines. They're going to have to start thinking about what their play in location-based entertainment is.
Yeah, and to some extent, I think Netflix for a while has been it's been far more of a traditional media company as opposed to a tech company in a lot of ways, I think. And you're right, Warner Brothers does adds some tools to their armory, really, which makes them more like a kind of traditional studio. And having the merchandise element and the parks, which has been something that they've never had up to that point, is a big deal, and I think completes the picture in a way for them. I think probably one of the questions, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that, is whether they have the bandwidth to commit to as much original programming as they've done up to this point, as well as manage some very big legacy IPs. I mean, it includes Harry Potter, DC, some enormous, sort of an enormous library of shows and IP.
I mean,
does that crowd out kind of? Yeah, it does. But does it crowd out their ability to really, still kind of put all of their efforts into creating another Stranger Things, Squid Games? Does it start to kind of crowd out some of the original programming?
Do you know what? I would imagine, certainly in the short term, it does. Because they've got this influx of library content that would be new to the platform, or some of it's been on there before but then disappeared. But I mean, even just looking at Friends brings in masses of viewing still.
Yeah.
So that's going to take up a whole chunk of their inventory and space on Netflix. And I would imagine quite a lot of viewing. People will always go back and watch Friends. And you've got a whole new generation of teenagers that are discovering it and loving it just as much as we did back in the day. So I think, at least in the short term, it would probably mean a reduction in originals. But, of course, that halo doesn't last forever. And at some point, people will start saying, Oh, yeah, I've worked through my favourite series of Friends, and I've done my replays of whatever HBO series that I loved the first time around. It's beginning to feel a little bit samey again. So they will be forced to get back on the originals track at some point. And I think in the short term, yeah. Why would you create
and
required a load?
Yeah, and I guess the question is, how short is the short term? Because if you applied that thinking to, I don't know, Disney with Marvel and Star Wars, I mean, those two franchises have lasted a good 10, 20 years.
The interesting
So
thing,
producers could be waiting around a long time if we're gonna wait till that's.
I wonder if there would be lessons to be learned from that, though, because there was a point where Marvel and Star Wars fatigue set in. You remember 3 years ago or so, there were new spin-off series coming all the time, and some of them felt rushed and some of them broke canon, and they were retconning kind of bits of lore, and they were changing stuff that was incensing the diehard fans. I do wonder if, who knows, if the great and the good at Netflix would be like, oh yeah, we're not going to go too crazy. We're not going to
Maybe.
Yeah, milk them too hard. But who knows, because Hollywood does tend to make the same mistakes over and over.
I mean, there's also kind of maybe we're not comparing like for like in some respects, because Harry Potter has continued to be, for example, that's continued to be an IP that they've had spin-offs and continue to extend that franchise in a way that, certainly for Star Wars, there were big gaps in terms of them not really making any content. Whereas it feels like with Harry Potter, that's been a pretty consistent flow of new content. And with DC, they've maybe got the advantage that whole universe is being rebooted, and there aren't really those diehard fans that will be really. I
got to jump in there. They will, because I've been getting live commentary from my DC obsessed 16-year-old about the debate about the Snyderverse and Zack Snyder and his.
I suppose that's what I mean, though, is that there've already been those debates. So in some ways, whatever they do is going to be business as usual, because even if there is controversy, it will just be a continuation of the Snyderverse versus who's the new guy in charge of DC. I've forgotten his name now.
I know,
but it will be a continuation of those. I
think
disputes.
I think whatever happens, the debate about whether Snyder should have been given more of a chance to develop the Snyderverse, or whether it's Paramount that takes it, or whether Netflix takes it. I think particularly
whether Henry Cavill is the original Superman, all of those questions. But in some ways, that again is to their advantage, because other people have already taken the heat and the friendly fire from those. Those debates. There's no that they're not kind of upsetting a hornet's nest that hasn't been upset up to this point.
That's true.
So it's interesting. I'm zooming out a bit, and so I think that really establishes. I think you can totally see, for Netflix point of view, how it is quite. You can totally understand why they went for Warner Brothers. That it does unlock some stuff that they haven't been able to unlock, and it adds some operational muscle in areas where they maybe haven't had that up to this point.
The debate about, and Sarandos has said it himself, that he doesn't really see the value in theatrical. They were almost forced to go back into theaters with K-pop Demon Hunters. Other movies that they've produced, they've put into theaters for a relatively short run just to qualify for various awards. He's never been convinced by the whole theatrical strategy thing. And I've seen a lot of comment about how it would, if they took control of Warner Brothers, how it would affect that theatrical strategy. But we've said a lot of times in kids media, it's still pretty important. And we know that the most successful franchises really benefit from a theatrical release. So is that a concern if it goes to Netflix?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we can see that if the deal goes through with Netflix. I think Netflix will be a winner in that. I do. I think it works for them. I totally understand why they've gone for it. I think cinemas and film directors and film producers probably will be losers in that, because I agree. He's given every indication that he's not really a believer in cinema. And if you look at like the box office for the last year, if you took Warner Brothers out of that box office for the last year, it would be very, very weak. They definitely are they're a bit of a, Warner Brothers movies are kind of tentpoles in the whole overall box office.
Yeah.
And if Netflix then basically tried to reduce the commitment to 2-week windows, I don't really know what impacts that would have on cinema chains. It might be one of those ones where it makes it very difficult for cinema chains to really thrive or survive within that setup. So yeah, you can totally understand why people like James Cameron have been up in arms about it, because
and you look at how,
that.
we were just talking about franchises, and this really potentially bolsters Netflix's well of franchise. But you look at Barbie. Now, I know that's it's kids and it's broader because, it's an iconic IP. But Barbie would not be Barbie without the Barbie movie and the success that had in theaters.
No.
It doesn't feel like you could replicate the success that is and was Barbie if it only had a short run in theaters and then went straight to streaming. It just wouldn't feel like the event that Barbie was. I mean, it was huge, wasn't it? Barbenheimer, we all went to the cinema.
Totally, but there's an element where by Netflix buying Warner Brothers, it may be that for individual movies, it hurts those movies not to have a theatrical release. But it might also be that just viewed in the round, that it might be to the benefit of Netflix as a whole to have that movie going, to have the box office to have that attention move from movies to TV.
To funnel it.
That may be a kind of of the trade-offs, that may be a trade-off that Netflix are happy to go with.
Yeah, I see why that is a very obvious trade-off. I'm just less convinced that it works. And when I say that, what I mean is, we've spoken about it before, the event of going to the cinema, you go there, you buy your popcorn, you're with everybody else dressed in pink because it's Barbie. And you don't get that same sense of when you're watching it at home on the sofa and the kids are playing up and you want to stop and go and get a cup of tea. And so and then what knock-on effects does that have further down the line when you do get to that merchandise play? So again, Barbie wouldn't have sold the number of Barbies and associated merch it's sold since if it wasn't from all of the fanfare and the specialness that was around the actual Barbie movie release in theaters. So I wonder, yes, I buy the principle, funnel attention from there to Netflix on the TV in the home, but around that, are there trade-offs that actually might hurt commercially further down the line?
They might do. It's just, I think Netflix, I think that I can understand the suspicion that people have that Netflix might approach this with a streamer mindset, first of all, and see if theatrical exists, see it as in some ways an added bonus, but not a core part of the strategy, which would be similar to kind of how K-pop Demon Hunters worked, is that you, in some ways, cinema ends up being added value, but it's not a core part of the offer. And I mean, I think if that's what's fueling some of the disquiet about Netflix buying Warner Brothers amongst the film community in Hollywood. And I think that's also what's being used with Paramount Skydance's hostile bid to try and disrupt the Netflix Warner Brother deal.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about whether that's got a good chance of working. I'm sure there is an argument that from a monopoly point of view, that, Netflix would be buying the third biggest streamer.
Mm.
And the second one, I think, is Amazon Prime, which in some ways, I think people don't almost even view as a...
Yeah.
They don't view it in the same way because it's such a small part of Amazon's business.
Yeah, it's
So-
almost secondary
Yeah.
to the rest of their business, which is shopping.
Yes. Yeah. So I think for that reason, there's a case to make for the monopoly argument.
It's so the monopoly argument is being stretched, isn't it, though, when there are so many other, using the Amazon example, you can't really say streaming is streaming anymore, because one of the biggest streamers in Amazon is also a shopping behemoth, and they're all
Yep.
becoming intrinsically linked. You've got content commerce. Okay, we're going to sell you stuff whilst you're watching. How do you extrapolate streaming from that then? So I think, in this case, I can see the argument, but I think in the future, it's going to be get even harder to delineate between what is streaming and what is just a media conglomerate that has all of these other facets. YouTube, the same thing.
Yeah. Although I think so. YouTube's an interesting argument because I think that often is used. I'm sure Netflix might use that as an argument to support that it's not a monopoly, but
Yeah,
I think
because is
that
YouTube a streamer?
But I think the fact that YouTube doesn't commission its own content and doesn't really play in that area means that I don't think YouTube and Netflix are really really exist in the same category. I think the fact that Netflix is a commissioner of programs makes them far more like a traditional broadcaster, and Netflix is YouTube is a sort of different animal, really.
Yeah, but then for every difference, you can also point out similarities. They're both algorithmically curated. Therefore, that puts a specific lens on what kind of content gets surfaced and commissioned, which is different to traditional kind of networks, I suppose.
I tell you where I think they are different, though, is that YouTube... So Netflix are editorially responsible for the content that exists on their platform. There's somebody at Netflix that commissions that content or acquires that content. And so they're responsible for what's shown on that channel in a way that YouTube always avoids, because just by its nature of being user generated, they can't be editorially responsible. So I think the user generated element makes a big difference.
But both of them, one without editorial curation and responsibility in YouTube, and the other one with that in Netflix, they still both feed them through a black box algorithm. So
there
are similarities in the pipes that they go through, I guess is what I'm saying.
They are. I guess where it becomes an issue in terms of the monopoly argument is when we kind of move to consider producers, is that if your kind of business is a production company or producer where you're creating content for a broadcaster or a platform, that basically you're looking to have that content, that program and series commissioned by either Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Disney. Then the monopoly question becomes more pertinent, because ultimately you're moving into a space where potentially it feels like there's one less independent buyer for the work that you produce. And that independent buyer might also be busy with managing a lot of legacy IP that they've just acquired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can see why that would really concern a lot of producers, given that we've seen from any number of presentations from Ampere at MIP to, industry reports that green lights are tanking. And then here we've got potential consolidation that reduces the potential number of green lights even further. It's not a great outlook, is it? Fewer shows, less experimentation as they just mine what they've got in their catalogue. It kind of stifles innovation as well. When we've been so excited at K-pop Demon Hunters and how things are beginning to feel like there might be some fresh stuff coming through. Potentially this is a setback to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. I mean, you feel like, I think Netflix will argue that there's going to be more money released to pour into programming, but you wonder whether a lot of that will be earmarked to kind of get as much value as they can out of the IPs that they've acquired. And that's going to be quite a narrow group of producers that they'll be going to for that. I mean, I don't know enough about that, but that's probably, that would be one of my concerns, I guess, from a producer's point of view.
I mean, let's talk about Paramount, because as it stands, and we're at Tuesday, the 9th of December, they've come in overnight with what is being talked as a hostile takeover. They've gone direct to shareholders. They've, I think they've offered $30 per share direct to shareholders to take the whole lot. So not just the IP, to take the networks and everything. What was really interesting in reading some of the commentary, of which there has been plenty, was about potentially a rumored promise by the Ellisons that CNN would be tweaked to be much more pro-administration and pro-Trump, which we know is kind of, I mean, that's something that does get Trump very excitable. In my head then, I was thinking about the potential politicization of kids' media within that. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of imagination that actually that could be massaged too. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that more of the conspiracy stuff in terms of, because I understand kind of where the speculation comes from, but I feel like it's so difficult to kind of really know for certain what that might be. That, yeah, I'm not sure really where that would come down to. Really, I'd imagine that CNN. So if that was, I'd imagine that CNN has, what does it have in terms of regulation, in terms of the political stance of its output?
I think CNN is more centrist than.
But do they have any regulatory kind of?
In the US, do they? Oh, do you know, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I suspect not as much as we would have.
Right.
But
I guess with the existence of Fox, it suggests that, you have CNN, you have Fox, and they both occupy very different positions on the political spectrum.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I think
it's tricky, isn't it? Because the other thing is that they've also got to be mindful of the audience. I mean, I'm sure if CNN went to become suddenly become more MAGA, the audience might not appreciate it.
I don't think they care about the audience. I think they care about controlling the messaging, don't they? But my point is, and it is hotly contested news politically in the US. I mean, you don't have to even be following it too closely to see how that works with various lawsuits that the Trump administration have filed against them. But does that extend into kids programming? And that is a concern for me, particularly in the sense that you look at the Ellisons and they've got, I mean, they are close to the Trump administration. That's fairly clear. They've bought UFC and TKO. They're all part of that big kind of group with Dana White. That's very much about that kind of aggression and UFC. And there's lots of that programming now coming into Paramount. Does that, again, if we're talking about CNN being told that they've got to be more pro-Trump, we've got kind of this aggressive kind of alpha type tone to a lot of the content and a lot of the investments and acquisitions that they've made. Does that bleed down into the kids' IP that they will have in their stable then? I don't know. This is pure conjecture. It's just something that was at the back of my mind, just looking at it as a whole, just was like, could that really affect the kind of messaging that ultimately shapes the kids' media diet of whoever owns this stable of IP?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's also, with the wrestling stuff, sometimes it's tricky to really try and separate what's just there because it happens to be very popular, and it makes it. You mean there's a clear kind of business argument for getting into that area because it's quite a big market, and kind of, and whether that's, so what's kind of a business decision and then what is politically motivated, I guess, ends up becoming quite difficult to answer. And I think it's also difficult for us to kind of view it through a lens that doesn't, in some ways, kind of tell us what we think we're going to find in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it is a minefield, like you say. What is political and what is just because it works and it's popular? And I even wrote something yesterday about how a lot of the streamers are beginning to feel a little bit samey with all of their cross licensing of content, and in a sense, Paramount is just doing what I kind of advocated, particularly with sports I was talking about yesterday. Is they're each trying to find what their thing is, their flavor, their positioning, and actually Paramount is. It's about UFC, it's about WWE, it's about that kind of much more charged programming, it feels. But you know what? It's fair enough. It's a position to adopt. At least it gives you a differentiator, as we spoke about with Louis Grenier, a point of differentiation. So
and I guess with Paramount, there's you almost get the sense that some of the shift in their programming that's been happening for a while.
It has.
Anyway.
It has, yeah.
And maybe it's partly motivated by having to have some distinctiveness in terms of what your offer is.
Yeah. No, I don't.
The trouble with a lot of these things is that distinctiveness can be that everyone can then end up moving in the same direction. So what you don't end up getting is variety. You just get a change of mandate, and that can be, you end up just getting something that is as uniform as what kind of was there previously. It's just kind of like people have moved from one position to another en masse. Whereas, you'd like you said, what I miss in some ways, and this is kind of not political, it's more about the distinctiveness of the brands, which, and particularly for kids media, is I miss that the entertainment universe where you had a Cartoon Network, a Disney, and Nickelodeon with very distinctive program offers and tones of voices. And I think going back to the Netflix Warner Brothers deal is when that ends up becoming, when all of those different brands are owned under one roof, there's that fear that it might start to become a bit homogenous. And what the industry really needs is kind of distinction. Competitive voices.
I mean, I don't know what Paramount's plans for the networks, cable networks, would be, and one assumes that Cartoon Network is included in that. Whereas that was never part of the deal with Netflix; they only wanted the IP. No, they were getting the streamers, weren't they? So they were going to get HBO. But I mean, we've hinted at it before. There might be an opportunity now, as Ian Whittaker said when he was on, for somebody who owns those networks to do exactly what you said, actually move away from what has become a relatively homogenized streaming offering where kids is concerned to going, no, let's go back to, let's have a Cartoon Network. Let's have a channel that has a flavor, that is that Clubhouse approach that we spoke about. You were a Cartoon Network kid. You were a Toon Disney kid. And, that actually is your differentiation at a point where they're struggling for them. So maybe that credence is more that, favors more the Paramount approach where they're going to buy everything and they are looking as a company to differentiate versus a Netflix, which I don't know if Netflix for me has a flavor anymore. You used to kind of know what you were going to get on Netflix, and that's kind of gone. Same as Disney Plus and.
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably push back against this description, but they're so big that there's an element where Netflix are sort of like the Walmart of TV content. that they contain so many different brands.
Yeah.
The Netflix itself can't really have a tone of voice.
Yeah.
It sort of has
It's
to
a
be.
postcode.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like it's a kind of entertainment supermarket.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's fascinating because we could probably dive into how many analogies there are with different supermarkets these days as well, and
Yes.
how you've got now kind of niche independent retailers popping up that seem to be coming back into favor.
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing with Netflix is that it manages to be, in some ways, Walmart and Whole Foods. It kind of contains both, really, within that, or Tesco's and Waitrose, if we wanted to go for the UK centric.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so seeing as we're talking about the UK, I mean, we're talking about a battle that is being waged over in the US, even though it inevitably has international repercussions. But do we think? I mean, this consolidation again. It's something that came up when we were chatting with Ian Whitaker. Could we see this happening over here? Because we're a pretty small fry when you're looking at the might of these networks and these media.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're already having a little bit of that, aren't we? With so you've got Sky and ITV.
Yeah.
I've heard people suggest that, I think it may have even been on The Rest is Entertainment, that ultimately Channel 4's reason for being doesn't make as much sense in the current market, and so would potentially Channel 4 and the BBC start to be kind of merged together as one state-owned operation.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like something has got to happen for us to be able to be competitive internationally. And again, that will impact kids and kids' content, even though there doesn't seem to be much of it left being commissioned in the UK. But, individually, when you've got ITV, Sky, I know Sky is part of Comcast, but Channel 4 and the BBC, and you look at those against the might of this battle that's being fought between Paramount Plus and Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix, to be competitive, it feels like there'll need to be a bit of consolidation over here, right?
Oh, yeah. I think undoubtedly. And even like the ITV Sky thing, in some ways, I mean, Sky is, I mean, it's effectively kind of US owned now, isn't it?
Yeah, because of
so then ITV, there's a question mark in terms of whether it's kind of a UK operation in the same respect. But yeah, I certainly think that in terms of Channel 4 and the BBC, there seems like there's definitely an argument there. Whether it would happen or not, I'm not sure. But you get the feeling that whole era where, I remember when there was some talk of different channels merging might be in the 90s or the noughties, and basically it was perceived as being monopolistic. I don't think there's that kind of thinking now. I think people are being thinking more protectively, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, going back to the Paramount one, I guess that I think Ian Whitaker, I read him saying that actually, if the Warner Brothers Paramount deal had gone ahead, that would have potentially sort of shaken up the market in a way that might have been interesting. Whereas I think why it makes perfect sense for Netflix is, I think it's a way for Netflix to consolidate their leader position and strengthen that, really.
Yeah, I don't think we've even got a hope of predicting how it's going to play out. I imagine it's going to have very many twists and turns over the next 12 months, and it's unlikely to happen any quicker than that from what I gather. So there's plenty of time for more surprises to come between now and then. I just hope whoever gets it, whoever does gain the Looney Tunes canon and Hanna-Barbera, does something with them. God,
absolutely. Yeah, that would be interesting. It's definitely one for us to keep an eye on. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, indeed. We'll probably have to do several more emergency pods talking about this.
Probably.
But in the meantime, yes, we'll wrap up there. We're coming into our festive episode next week. So
Yes,
if
fantastic.
anybody's got any points that they want to make, or even look back, we should perhaps look back at what we usually do a predictions episode, don't we? We should look back at what our predictions were last year. But yeah, or even
I don't think anyone had Netflix Warner Brothers on their scorecard, to be honest.
But yes, or even any if anybody wants to submit some Christmas quiz questions,
Oh yeah,
wouldn't that
would
be great?
Yeah, absolutely.
Submit them before next week and we'll see what we can do. But in the meantime, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a sign off. I'm going to attempt to do a sign off.
Go for it.
So thank you for joining us. Tune in again next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find us on TikTok and we're on YouTube and we're on all of those other platforms too. And our new weekly newsletter, which goes out on Substack, which is a bit of a digest of what we've spoken about in that week. So just go and fill your boots.